is the nature of this heritage as provincial, national, and what about it is heritage? Okay? Is it a particular building? Is it the whole landscape, cultural landscape? And we all agree that it is a cultural landscape where there is some space for some building of appropriate things that enhance the park as a park, which focuses on preserving heritage environment. But when you permit all sorts of development to intrude into this cultural landscape, disregarding the quality, disregarding the many years of consultation, the values that we insisted needed to be enhanced, then we must. We're losing.
So is there a question?
The question is, how can we be asked to consider something that is completely contrary to the original policy that we consulted on, and to the years of consultation and the research that has been done on the heritage and the significance of the site? And my feeling is, when I look at the proposals, which are not yet proposals, it's ignoring those things. It's ignoring the nature of this heritage, which is a place that tells the story of the earliest.
There has to be a question. I'm not going to stand there and listen.
The question is, can you please look at all that consultation and all the policy that's taking place, and all the positions by Heritage Western Cape, by other heritage practitioners, who recognize that this is a heritage site that needs to be protected and that its environment needs to be protected.
The answer is yes.
And then how can you ignore the fact that it needs to be protected by then proposing 7-story buildings and intrusion in places?
If you believe that that proposal does not address the heritage issues that you say are on the table, you need to put that in a comment that can be assessed and taken into account when it goes before Heritage Western.
I hear you, and that's what we've done many times.
And you need to do it again. I'm sorry. I'm only involved in this process. The fact that I have been involved in previous processes on this site, but the fact is we are running a process right now. We are in the heritage process. The opportunity to comment around heritage-related issues is now. Okay? You have the opportunity to do so. You can do it immediately. We can do it on the website. We can do it via email. All those opportunities exist. And those comments will have to be taken forward and assessed properly. And the outcome of that will be presented to Heritage Western Cape for this.
Thank you for the opportunity to report against. And I do have a few questions. Can you hear me? Yeah. So, the first question is, President Cyril Ramaphosa and Cabinet announced that this area is part of the National Council of Operation and Resistance. Also, as you know, that this is undergoing a kind of nomination process for national heritage status, South African Heritage Resources Status. My question is, to what extent is the River Club a precedent in terms of the emboldened, completely inappropriate scale of development that is actually, in our view, when you're talking as a tormented community, that is actually time and time again go through these processes. And I understand the fact that on the 10th of October, you wanted to put in this comment box. And I also understand the obligations that you have professionally and so on and so forth. But I think, we have to also recognize the level of triggering and trauma that comes with this particular process. And I think that just needs to be said. So, those are the first three questions. Second, and this is complete, the extent to which the First Nations narrative, for instance, is going to take advantage of a central point in this time. Will you be drawing on the example set by the river? And if so, it is only correct to advise that that process is still under contestation. And although there is a bill, you can understand there was nothing amicable that came. Most importantly, I think, injury to any part of an interconnected landscape is an injury to the whole. And in the same way, we've seen the egregious onslaught that has been allowed to take place and is still being challenged. It is absolutely impossible to expect a community to engage in processes that are almost identical and similar to the one that came before it, and somehow imagine that there will be a different outcome. So there are these existing resources that are there. And I think by engaging those existing resources, we will come to the fact that this should be allowed to be declared a national heritage site. It should be allowed actually to be declared a World Heritage Site. Where fundamentally underpinning the entire contestation is a first people who want to maintain and sustain the last remnants of a very important sense of belonging for the reasons for restorative justice, restitution, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Southern World, and for the Pricinct in its combined tapestry to become a recognized space, and not we are going to give you a little center here, a window, a door. We are done with talking about a discussion of how we can piecemeal negotiate some kind of trade-off. The trade-off of an existing genocide that hasn't been recognized, the trade-off that in this province and in other parts of this country, you are part of a community that still undergoes the linguistic theft, still undergoes the extended violence of being millions of Africans that are unconvinced even of our own Africans. So when we come to places like Molen, when we come to places like the rivers and the two rivers, these are the vestiges that allow that sense of dignity and allow that sense of reverberation of a sense of who we are as a people. And what I urge you is please take into consideration that this particular person completely defined the community. The observatory service was hacked by the city that humiliated it in terms of insisting that to pay certain costs as against to stop all litigation around the countries. The same thing other indigenous communities were brought in, and it has resulted in a divide and conflict. In other words, a new heritage of violence and contestation has emerged out of its precinct. So, my plea to you is, if we can center an element of healing, an element of conciliation, and an element of a kind of restorative justice which may be adverse to the typical kind of professional expectations that you and your team may have, you will be doing a community the biggest service, albeit the fact that your contractual arrangements and the way things have been done in terms of how we ascertain and how we think from people what spatial planning and building environment informs are, puts us in a place where a real dialogue can become possible out of this whole process. But as we stay right now, I can say quite clearly and confidently that the Southern communities that have objected will continue to object against this. Oude absolutely will object against this. And until something is different, and there's nothing different about this. And I certainly hope that Heritage Wisdom will tell you that there's nothing different about this. So that we can, again, begin to start understanding heritage in a way that you don't invite piecemeal certain entities to come in and show them a package of plans. When in fact, an entire package of plans should have gone through an earlier on co-design process. And unfortunately, in this situation, that level of co-design goes all the way back to 2007, 2006, and 1998 policy. But most importantly, it goes back to 1657. With this particular terrain, was disagreed for the first time. We were not judged always working on to legitimize the death of indigenous land. And so, unless we are going to put those components into the center, it's just a repetitive, embarrassing, humiliating, trauma-driven experience to come again and again and again to say, are we going to remain completely invisible in this process? And it's going to be a checkbox for the system. And while I might, I don't want to clear out the participate in terms of whatever, it's good to having this. Most important is it's important if you take notes, and I know you take notes, but it's really important to take note that there's a soul, a very, very fractured soul within this whole place over there. And the most delicate of care needs to be a priority. The most delicate needs to be a priority. And so for someone to say to me, no, this is not a public event, this is a sort of private event because, we worry about, people are actually being paid to do their work, being accountable. We choose the professions we have. And unfortunately, when it comes to heritage, this is one of the biggest questions in our country, the conflict with the global south of the world. And so it's going to be a rugged, it will be a rugged exchange. But we cannot have a situation where the robustness and the genuineness of that exchange is going to be evaluated through processes of how work is moved across our country.
Thanks. So we'd like to also have questions because the most important thing is what you've said and what you've said, Mark, has to go through with his report to Western Cape. So everybody that can do that, it's most important. Speaking to him helps, but it's going to be your inputs that go through to Western Cape, Heritage Western Cape, for all of this to be done. So that's very, very important. Whatever you say here needs to go through. It's most exactly, and with improper documentation. Nigel's one is to answer any questions that you have so that those inputs can happen. So try to think about it that way so that it's not a springboard here, but it gets done, and those are the questions that we need to have answered here. But I need to leave very soon, that I know you were next. But please, I wouldn't like you to ask until somebody else gets a chance and then we can get that question.
Sorry, I need to answer the question.
Yeah.
Because there were a couple of fundamental questions. The first one is, what relationship this proposal has with the real club of the other side? None. And other than the fact that that exists down there and needs to be contextualized, our side needs to be contextualized, we are not influenced by what has happened across. This is an entirely separate process that deals with the Oude Molen site. That site was not provincially owned, city owned, and all kinds of other complications that we know all about. Those same complications may exist here. But we are going through a process, a legislative process, which requires us to begin with heritage, move through heritage, into land use, and move through land use to decision. We are in the legislative process. The question is, why is this you need to put in your role? This team will have to assess it. And I apologize for the fact that we are not 15 in the exercise, that you have to answer the same questions again. I apologize for that. But we can't do anything about it. The history is what it is. Your engagement with that history is what it is. And I'm asking you to engage with my process that I'm working on. And if it has to be the same thing over and over and over again, so but it's the only way that the concerns of the community can get reflected in the heritage process and subsequently in the land use process is through written comments that we can assess and address in our proposal that goes with the heritage list. So to the extent that you can provide me with that, and to the extent that the assessment takes it into account and puts it before heritage list, those decisions will be made. But I am involved in the legislative process. That's what we're doing.
I want to ask you this question. You saw that all of the stuff here, because it gives one a good sense of what is the approach to the heritage of this nation. When you look around there, you get a sense that with problems with warehouses around the heritage significance of this place. And tonight, I'm not changing that. Tonight, we are all drawn towards all of that, numbers 1 to 17 or 21 or so. It's defeats the purpose. Because we want the heritage presentation to have a good sense of what is our perspective around the heritage issues around here. And only that should be done. And then I agree, then you guys can come with a plan and so on. And there's an issue around the co-design. The issue of the co-design has been on the table and has been agreed. We got a sense they've agreed. We were told all the time, we've got no plans. There's nothing. We're waiting on you guys and so on. So I mean, that the appeal is, let the focus be in this is heritage impact assessment. Let the report be about that, not around this plan. We are not agreeing with this plan. We want to agree around what is the heritage significance of this place. We don't want to disagree with the government. Remember those people in government, they live in it. They live in this. That's what our appeal is. And we can get that message across. So that's the point.
I'll answer that at least in one.
Yeah.
Your appeal is that the heritage process was properly understood. My appeal to you is to get onto the website and read the gigabytes of documentation that is available that gave rise to this, which is a minuscule summary of the full package that is available. Okay. If you disagree with the content of that research, then you need to write to us and say you've missed something, or you've done this wrong, or you've done that wrong. The point is that in a legislative process that arrives at a heritage impact assessment, they have to assess something. This entire process will arrive at what is called heritage indicators. All of the things that you're talking about are the heritage indicators. If we've got them wrong, we need to know that. And the only way we're going to know that is if you tell us. Okay? That assessment around the indicators gives rise to a process which will arrive ultimately in a proposal. And this is just, that's the preferred situation currently. Okay? It's not a final plan. But a final plan, or a plan, will be presented to Heritage Western Cape that shows that the development will be development of the site, if it's at all possible, has taken account of the indicators that are accepted. Okay, so you need to read the documentation. I can't do that for you. I've been part of it from the start. Okay, I'm pretty well acquainted with what's in that documentation, but it's a huge amount of documentation, and you need to read it. And as I say, if there's something that's been missed, you need to say so. This is your opportunity in the heritage process to tell me I've got it wrong, or I've missed something, or I've got it right and you think it's fantastic.
So can we just do something here? I want to hand over to Chair now. Oh, okay. Yes.
We spoke about basically, I'm in construction. Okay? I've done a lot of buildings regarding heritage. Right Street, major heritage sites. Okay? We could not throw down a wall because it's heritage. Even though that wall is falling down, they said no, we need to wall. It's stabilize the wall. This entire place on Molen is actually heritage. So you guys need to actually go back to your books and see what you're actually talking about. Because what you're talking about does not make sense. Okay? Go back to it and actually look at your process. Because I've done a lot of sites.
So I'm going to say this again to everybody. I think that meeting is not going to help. The box, the comments, so that it gets to Heritage Western Cape, so that when they take it easily forward, they also have all your inputs. And that's the most important thing. What I want you people to do tonight, because Nigel has agreed to do it, is ask him specific questions that he can answer on clarity, so that when you give your inputs, you're doing a good job, because that's the most important thing that we need to get out of it. Otherwise, just telling him things like that, it's not going to change his stance, but he's going to ask you to put that in because that is what's very important for us, for everybody here, to formulate something so that when it gets in front of Mr. Western Cape, they're going to look at what he said, they look at what you said, they will look at what you said, they will consider what you said, and that's the important thing. The other one I'll say it's also very important, there's a preferred alternative. We do what we did before, our alternative. And it's an alternative we work on which we can also present, and that's very important so that you have maybe 1, 2, but you have a third one. We've worked for many, many years on that, Mark, you know about it, but those are the things that's important, and we put those in front of Heritage Western Cape. So I'm going to have to leave. You can continue with this, but let it not be, I think we have enough context. Let it be something specific that Nigel can answer that will get us to a position that with what we're sending is considered. And I think that's the most important thing. As your input is very good inputs, but the inputs is not going to be to Nigel. It's going to be Heritage Western Cape for something bigger. Unfortunately, I have a meeting that starts at 5:30. But Rod is going to take over from the year and he'll do that. Okay, thanks.
So there's a question about. What is the closing date for comments?
20th of October.
Sorry, just that lady there. Just got yeah, questions, please.
In essence, what it is a process that moves from a higher tier of planning, water policy planning, down to a detailed building plan in the last level. So you go through development framework, precinct plans, site development plans, and building plans. That's the process that we follow. What we are doing here, what we'll be doing in the land use process, is applying for a precinct plan approval for the whole precinct of Oude. Subsequent to that, there will be detailed plans that have to comply with the conditions of the precinct plan at the level of the site. And so let's assume for a moment that the development is approved to happen. It would only be approved to happen in terms of the precinct plan, which would then dictate whether the site development plan can happen, which would then dictate whether the water plan can happen. So that's the process that's involved. In terms of the heritage process engaging with the other processes involved in land use, in the first instance, there is no NEMA trigger on site for any of the development projects. So NEMA is the National Environmental Management Act. If we had a NEMA process, which is exactly what they have across the road in Riverton, for example, heritage became a commenting body in the NEMA process. That's not the case here. Because we don't have a NEMA process, Heritage is a body making a decision in its own right. So the process that we have to follow from here is ultimately going to result in a decision taken by Heritage as a paper that will be conditioned in whatever fashion, assuming that we get it. And that decision is then moved forward into the planning process, which would then seek land use rights that would confirm that decision from the land use process. And the land use rights are confirmed through the planning process. So this process has engaged with the environment in a broader sense, but not usually in terms of the NEMA process, because it wasn't required to do so. It has engaged and will engage with the planning process going forward. And all of the proposals that we talk about, the preferred alternatives and the various other alternatives that have come forward, have also all been, it's called a test of what is their work through the processes of traffic and service provision and so on. So we understand that if you develop this site, you need to increase the sewage level, for example. So you need to provide for an alternative electrical supply because it's not sufficient in the areas. All of those are picked up and they can take into account the potential for the development of the site. And if you have to put 100 million rand worth of sewer, the only way you're going to make it work is if you've got 100 million rand worth of development. Otherwise, financially, it's just going to happen. So it has to work from a financial perspective. And that is one of the elements that is being tested. And the final question we have is around potential grade of grade. There is no doubt from a heritage perspective that the management of and the development of to the extent that they are very that people know about, you need to tell us. You need to tell us. And beyond that, if something is found in the excavation, I mean, one of the issues, for example, that is picked up in the heritage process is trying to establish where the old mill was. Nobody seems to know exactly where it is. And the only way we're ultimately going to find it is by finding the foundations of that mill. So there's a very prescriptive statement about what can happen in and around the mill house, so that we don't lose that opportunity of establishing at least that part of the heritage list. And there are many others. I mean, First Nations heritage is a massive input into this exercise. The co-design exercise, I haven't been aware of that, to be perfectly honest, okay? And maybe I missed that. But if there has to be a co-design exercise in terms of this design solution and build solution, you need to make that input. And I'm sorry, if it's been made before and you held the plan, put it on the table.
Put it on the table.
Put it on the table to me. Doesn't mean put it on the table to me. Okay?
Well, this is the problem, that you're starting from scratch.
And we have to start from scratch, unfortunately, okay? Because this is a new professional team with a brand spanking new appointment. And while there was history attached to this thing, I understand that. Give it to me. If I don't have it, I don't know about it. If I do have it, we will take it into account. It may be that we bin it because we don't think it's appropriate today. But somebody else will have to tell me that I have it or haven't binned it correctly.
The same way, like you said, they must actually know that she's already done with it.
I think, sorry, just if I can answer that one quickly. Okay. Before you make that comment, I want you to read the documentation. Because if you haven't read the documentation, you cannot, with any legitimacy, make that comment.
And the same way, we need to know that you're not in the documentation.
Fine. If we wait on you, Matt.
Understanding very well, why wasn't a NEMA process required for this site? Particularly if it's pointed out that for the First Nation people, heritage is tightly linked to the environment. So why was the NEMA?
In terms of the legislation, we do not trigger anything in the NEMA legislation that requires an environmental impact assessment. Okay, so there's nothing here. Our site ends where the fence is. So all of the open space that goes down to the river, that's Cape Town City Council land. It's got nothing to do with it. Okay, so we are well out of the floodlines. There are no defined springs on the site. They all happen if they do happen, and one of them is definitely a stormwater outlet. But if there are wetlands on the end, that's off our site. That's in the council land. Okay, so nothing in terms of the legislation is triggered by a redevelopment proposal of this site.
in NEMA.
Okay. Thank anybody else? Yeah. I'll come back to the two of you. Let me hear some other people.
I just want to know, I think all of us, as people said, are towards this.
The plan.
Who decides that?
Who decided it?
Yeah, I mean, because I think it's that kind of stuff we really want to speak to as well.
That is merely an illustration of a development proposal.
But how does it get there? And my question really is after all the years, I think is anybody listening?
Nobody's listening.
Okay. Clear question. Good question. Nigel?
That is a development proposal which is driven by a whole lot of different prerogatives. One of which is obviously the client's requirements. The other is environmental and historical inputs into that. There is very definitely an economic input into it to understand if you're going to do things here, is it viable or isn't it viable? Okay. And it's a straw dog, if you like. Okay, it's up on there illustrating a proposal that has taken into account the heritage indicators as we currently have them. Okay. To the extent that that needs to change, it will change based on comments that we receive.
Okay.
Okay. Is it within that anything that acknowledges the current existence and use and operation and functioning of this precinct?
The reality is no. The reality, the reality is no. Okay? The reason being that at the moment, this entire site is zoned utility. So every single use on the site that is not utility in terms of the DMS is illegal.
What does utility mean?
It means, to all intents and purposes, you can build a substation. Okay? It's an incredibly restrictive zone in the zoning scheme. Okay? The fact is that the site is going to have to be rezoned anyway. Whether it's rezoned to accommodate the tenants as they currently are, or rezoned to accommodate a development proposal, is the exercise we're going through right now. All right. And if at the end of the day the commentary that comes back results in that plan being taken away and replaced with an existing tenant layout, so be it. That's what we would apply for. Okay? But right now, that's not my brief. Okay? That's not to say that the tenants on this site can't be accommodated in a proposal in some or other form. Okay? This proposal is largely driven by housing. There's a need to provide housing in the Western Cape. Okay? It needs to be provided at an appropriate level, at an appropriate cost, to address past imbalances, amongst other things. Okay? And it needs to be provided for on state-owned land, because we can amortize the cost of that land into the appropriate development, as they're doing at Conradi, for example.
Do you feel it's the same?
What, as Conradi?
Yeah.
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. And
Just
Conradi,
making sure.
if you look at the Conradi development, it's 5, 6, 7, 8-story developments, very high density of residential, extremely high density of residential. That's nothing like what we're talking about here. Okay? What we're talking about here in that proposal is 1 or 2 blocks of flats, but the rest are houses. They happen to be row housing proposals. Okay? That's what's shown on the schedule, on the development schedule. So this is not at the density of Conradi by any means. Okay. Hang on, there's a whole bunch of questions. I don't know if I've answered your question as much as I can. Okay, I think, again, it's one of those things that tenants on site who believe that they need to be able to stay here must put their commentary in.
So can we put that kind of commentary in the box today?
You can do it today or between now and the 10th of October.
Is that considered a heritage?
It's a good question, okay, and it goes back to one of the questions that was asked earlier, okay, about to what extent are the current tenants and current land use is part of a heritage process. And as I tried to explain, heritage on this site goes back a very, very long way. And the current occupants and utilization of the site is a very small component of that long heritage history. The extent to which they are important, you need to justify. And if it gets justified in the heritage process or in the land use process, it doesn't really matter, but you need to make your point.
Dan, then him, and that lady over there.
Dan from Oude, Molen. I suppose one of our biggest problems is that I know this is a conceptual plan, but it's like so you can secure development rights. Okay, so what you've done is cover the whole site so that eventually you can say, well, we can actually do pretty much anything. We've got all the rights. And then followed by a whole bunch of mitigating factors. okay, that you have to build into the plan. Why not put in a sensible plan that actually has the mitigation in it before, instead of actually giving the game away by putting a building on every square meter of this place?
Again, if you believe that the proposal, okay, is inappropriate from a heritage perspective,
Put that in writing.
put it in
Okay.
writing.
And the last question, in the HIA it says, from 2003, various redevelopment attempts were made, of which this is the latest. You don't think that details about those attempts are relevant to our understanding of the heritage now?
Relevant to the heritage side, absolutely. But the heritage process has reviewed all that heritage
Yeah, but it's not
documentation.
in other words, there's no detail about how these processes went and why they failed.
Again, you need to read the heritage document.
I've read the heritage document. Here's the page. Previous attempts, page 31.
Yeah.
Previous attempts at redevelopment post 2003. Nothing about them at all.
But none of them were approved. There was nothing to say.
Yeah, but don't you think it would inform the HIA as to why they failed?
Possibly not. I mean, this HIA process
why
was
we,
running.
in other words, our experience is here comes a plan to develop, we attend, we partake, it disappears. We never get told anything. Is that not relevant to actually now this process?
If you believe it is relevant, you need to tell me something.
Well, I'm suggesting that it seems to you it should be relevant.
Put it in writing to me and we will
I'm not
consider.
going to put that in writing.
That's fine. And I will deal with it.
Over there, I got the two of you, don't worry. No, first him and then her.
Thanks. The question really for me is, what's the heritage resource that we think is important here? Because talking about this thing and the term to business, I think hides a lot of issues. And I think to define what we're talking about will be a better way of dealing with it and to understand the significance of that heritage resource. Because I'm well aware that there are everybody's got different agendas. So there may be people that are living here at the moment in living space who live on change. There may be pilots, communities, residents who feel that nothing should change. And there may be other people that see the need for sites like this to address the bigger city issues. So in my mind, the question is, what's the heritage resource? Is it significant? To whom is it significant? Because I think that starts informing the process as opposed to a general discussion about what the development should or shouldn't do.
I think the heritage resource is pretty comprehensively dealt with in the heritage documentation. The analysis of what was of heritage importance and how that should be considered is dealt with. Okay? We have a snapshot of that up here. The detailed documentation is available to you. But it's all there. It's all in the documentation.
Yeah?
I would like to say that about the documentation. My understanding of this meeting today was that this is an open house around heritage practices. You put a proposal forward or documentation forward of like over 600 pages, including the pages probably close to 1,000 pages. You've been paid to put this together. You're not paid to read it, if you understand. So my understanding of this process today is that it's actually your job as a team to put in front of us what you've done and what the results were, and then explain why you came up with a different alternative, rather than just telling us that we need to ask questions and give documentation and then give comments. If this is what the open house is for, that you actually tell us what you did, why you got there, and what you came up with. The plans that you have put up there for an alternative, you say there's only 2 blocks of flats, everything else is houses. It doesn't look like houses. So maybe you can explain to us what's actually going on. My name is Boy,
Are you done?
yeah.
Okay, the original process, before everybody sat down and started asking me questions, the original process was that you could come in and you could work your way around, and at each station, the relevant professional was attached to that station, would answer the questions that were raised, having read that. Okay, I can't do that here. This is no longer that process. Okay, if you would like to understand something, feel free after this is over to find work, what you need answered, and ask the question of the professional attached to it. That plan is attached to that development schedule, which is quite clearly spells out what the uses are proposed attached to that plan, which is not blocks of flats. They're apartments and there are row houses attached to them.
Can I send you my bill for reading through it?
I'm sorry?
Can I send you my bill, my hourly bill for reading through it?
I just want to say, no, I'm not going to wait. I want to back here this. Okay. I had to leave work to take 3 hours of work to come to this meeting. I was expecting a projector, and I was expecting people to run us through something properly so that we knew actually what was going on here. I can't walk around here for 3 years worth of professional people's work. You come to my job in the film industry and learn what I do in 3 hours, and I wish you the best of luck. Very unimpressive.
Thanks, guys. Deborah, your hand was up. You still want to ask a question?
It's a very stupid question. You keep referring to the client. Is the client public works? Who is the client?
Client is the Western Cape government.
So there's no developers, there's no nothing. Our government has the money to implicate this thing, all by themselves.
No, they will ultimately dispose of the land. If there was an approved plan, they would dispose of the land in terms of that approved plan and with whatever conditions are attached.
So we're basically selling this land.
If there is an approved plan, ultimately that would be sold. Yes, and my guess is the government is not going to build the land out in this proposal. We've been told categorically that that's not going to happen.
Okay. Faiz, now you missed your question.
All right. The site. The site is not declared heritage. No. Rondebosch Common is declared heritage. Nothing on the land, no history, no people, they declared that heritage. So we have a greater chance here
Of getting a declaration?
of getting a declaration of heritage here
That's the process as I
than
understand it,
anywhere
somewhere.
else. I mean, there shouldn't even be a process. This should be something from government saying this is a piece of heritage. Because if an empty piece of land can get a heritage status, a place with buildings and people and history of Zulu king being incarcerated here, of visitors to this place, of oral historians. Surely you do not feel like there's something amiss here. Because I get the feeling that heritage is only going to do this, the legislative process, in order to facilitate a great crime against the Western Cape community, against the Western Cape people. In other words, taking a public site, coming up with a proposal. Now, it's really a question of integrity here. Will Heritage Department, your department, declare this a heritage site when we have a reference with nothing on it, pine trees that doesn't even belong there? Will they have the integrity to declare this a heritage site, yes or no?
Well, you can't ask me because I'm not the Heritage Western Cape.
No, I'm saying in your proposal, will you propose to them that this is more of a heritage site? They have a better chance of building on Rondebosch Common than they have here.
We will take your comment,
Okay.
and it will be put forward to Heritage Western Cape along with all the other comments and our assessment thereof. And Heritage Western Cape will have to make that call. I can't make that call.
They recommend
Now I'm asking,
heritage too.
will you put that proposal into them to say?
No, he answered you.
It's in writing, it will go to them.
Okay.
Can I a different question? There's an indication there's a national process to declare this a heritage site. So, should this place be declared, I want to pose this question differently. Should this place be declared a heritage site, would you guys still go and make a recommendation that development can take place on a place that has been declared a heritage site?
It would depend on the conditions of that declaration. If that declaration was so restricted that no development could happen here, nothing would happen here. But I can't presuppose that those conditions are going to be anything.
Okay. You and yes?
Two very quick questions. Again on heritage. Seeing as we're assessing the heritage, and we agree that the heritage is substantive, and leading on to the question of pre-existing reports, like within the local spatial development framework, previous HIAs by Bridget O'Donoghue, Melanie Atwell, both of whom push very strongly that the Trup area should be declared minimum provincial heritage. And in other iterations of these HIAs have actually been quite square that it should be national heritage, to the point that Heritage Western Cape shifted the provincial nomination of the Trup up to SARA, saying that provincial nomination doesn't apply anymore. We genuinely feel it must be national. So based on that and based on your expertise of the heritage, does your HIA include the fact that the heritage resources here ought to be nationally declared? Because if it's about the independency of assessing heritage, then that should be a prerogative by virtue of the fact there's been so many pre-existing iterations of that. And secondly, the client. Is it just Western Cape government? Or is it similar to the River Club, where there were non-disclosure agreements, where 3 years down the line, we then were summarily sort of told at the Municipal Planning Tribunal by the chair that the client was in fact Amazon? Are we sure that we're just dealing with Western Cape government? Or have they been spurred on and inspired to conduct this because there are clients that are hungry and that have shown great interest to invest in?
I'm not sure that okay, let me put it bluntly.
Yeah.
Okay? I can't answer that question because I'm not the Western Cape government. I'm operating in terms of a tender issued by the Western Cape government for me to act on their behalf. If you believe that something else is afoot, ask them. Okay, I think it's entirely inappropriate that you're asking this professional team that question.
I'm asking you in terms of professional integrity.
My professional integrity is to the tender and the brief, and my client is the Western Cape government. I know no further of any other negotiations that may or may not be happening beyond that.
In terms of the scope of what's being defined, is this a typical development proposal in your experience?
No. No, this is a much lower level of intensity of development. If this site was sold tomorrow, for example, boom, to a private sector developer, you would not be looking at that now. You'd be looking at something completely different.
Okay, thank you.
Just respond to the issue because we've raised a number of times. The issue about grading. Okay, so the heritage resources, if you have a look, are actually extreme. There are really hundreds of pages trying to identify that. All the work that has gone before by Bridget, by Melanie, by many people have all formed part of this assessment, and that has all been inputted by a number of people in all of the processes that have happened before. So that information is actually there. I think it is a complex and nuanced issue of heritage and what is significance, but there are a range of significance, and they start with the history of dispossession, and it actually continues through. I think it's very important to state that this history is not about one or two buildings. It is about a history of exclusion and dispossession, and it is very clear on that. And the issue about reparations is something that has to be part of the decision making, whatever the outcome is. So I think that that's important to say. The history of the declarations of the site is included in the report, including the latest ones, which actually have not been concluded. And there are proposals. The recognition of the Two Rivers Urban Park and the heritage significance has all been identified, and the site has been proposed for a provincial heritage grading with some, at an overall level, with some nuances in the individual, because it's a site of many parts. So I do think that people need to have a look at that and recognize that there is actually serious consideration about what is of heritage significance, and it is many things, and it is trying to balance that against other imperatives. But I believe that the outcome is about reparation in one way or another, but there are many claimants to that, whether it's the Zulu Kingdom, the First Nations, people who've been incarcerated in mental hospitals. It's really a very nuanced site, and the way in which you need to deal with it in a city of inequality is actually one of the things you have to make judgments about. So I do think, I recognize there's a lot of reading, but there's a lot of history.
Okay, thanks. Wait. The pattern of the HIA to how it's set up.
Wait, sorry. Excuse me. Hello. The guy who spoke. Hello. The guy who spoke. Please, you must raise your hand before you speak. Okay. First him, then that lady there, then this lady, then you.
All right, now the history of these things, there's some other people that arrived late on the scene that they need to be apprised of. 2001, the National Pricinct Consultative Conference in Oslo passed 21 resolutions, one of which had to do with this place, after which a delegation was dispatched to meet the government of the Western Cape. The Western Cape Pricinct Council was constituted then, led by then head of the National Pricinct Council. A delegation went to meet with the then Premier. After that, another meeting was held with the Premier's successor, after which a series of meetings was held with various national and provincial commissioners, and including two interspersed presidents. And then after that, in 2010, there was a meeting held here on the 28th of February 2010, right here in this hall, where a resolution was passed about the authentic history of the site and the need for its declaration. Past that, there was the Pricinct conference in Kimberley called by Minister Bugeli in 20. And one of the interesting things about that, one of the consultants here was Chief Ron Martin, but he was in his capacity as a heritage consultant and in his capacity as a heritage expert. He was placed on the special committee on Khoi and San land claims. In one of the proposals put forward to Chief Ron Martin was a proposal put forward by the Gonaikwa Cultural Council. Now that was in 2013. In 2014, we had a meeting, a site inspection with the then Chief Land Claims Commissioner, Tami Madunzel, Tami Madonso. And interspersed with that, there were a number of engagements with national, provincial, and local government. What the sum total of those engagements was the bludgeoning of the authentic First Nations voice and the trivialization of the matters that had been placed on the national agenda. This matter, in fact, is a matter that finds reference in UN documents from 2005. And it is one of the issues that give rise to the 2007 UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And one of the issues related to that, if you read through the Staffenhagen report, the special rapporteur of the United Nations Special Committee on Indigenous People, that informed UN draft is that issues like Oude Molen as a central place of eviscerized histories its cognition was necessary as a condition for the cognition, restitution, and restoration of the peoples that had been written out, altered out of the Compromiso Historical which founded South Africa. So let us be very clear. we are going to resubmit the narrative. One of the reasons why leadership had to make difficult choices, and people want to denigrate us and use all kinds of epithets to designate it to the leadership. But that is because they are incapable of understanding that there is an institutional memory related particularly to this site. This site itself, long before any Zulu, Xhosa political prisoner was here, it was a place of anchorage for a foundational people. And
Point of order, please. A point of order, please. May I just raise a point of order, please? Without any disrespect, I'm not trying to contradict what the gentleman is saying, but when I spoke, it was insisted that I ask a question.
Okay. Okay, thanks. I noted, Mark, I was about to make that point, but then he ended. I think I just want to make the point to the person who spoke, Nzeli Khoisan, as on behalf of Nigel, they indicated that people must make their inputs as well in writing. You've got time up till the 10th to do that. You?
Another one, very short period of time for us to get material that's available. So just upfront, personal basis, maybe I'm slow, but I would love an extension to that 2 weeks. So I'd like to know if that's a possibility. Number two, understood, this is all about heritage today, because apparently there was no name and not necessary. From an ethical perspective, when you're developing, I would have thought that environmental would have been straightforward. So what I want to ask them is, can we, in our capacity, then approach something like the likes of DFFE? Because DFFE, from my understanding, they engage with the environment surrounding heritage spaces.
Yeah.
So DFFE, if we're not going to go the NEMA route and we're not going to have an EIA done, then DFFE should do the assessment for something that's adjacent to a heritage site. My understanding, I could be wrong, I don't know my politics, it's just my information I've been given.
Good point, thank you. Just tell us what is DFFE to those who don't know.
Department of, was it Forestry?
Forestry, Fisheries and Environment.
Okay.
Yeah.
The zoning apparently is utility zone. And I think why a lot of us are feeling really anxious and wondering whether this is even a valid process. Is this just a puppet scenario, putting up pictures, intimidating us, say, come, finish reading, it is up there. You know, it's an insulting process for most people. Like I said, you work, now you've got to come in between 4 and 7. Say, sorry, between 4 and 5 you should have read all this information. And yes, no, we did send it to you by email, or it's just, it's almost like a kick in the face and an intimidation process. So what I'm also asking is, now you're saying it was zone utility, and then we'll see what happens. But that's zoning. When did that zoning happen? Because from what I understand, is that the land was given to the people of Cape Town, and it was given by the Falkenberg family as a place of restoration, of healing, of, it's a little last green line. We've got horses here, we've got stuff. There's no mention of the stables. There's nothing like that. So bugger the horses, bugger the children that are coming here for therapy. So it was given by the Falkenberg family for a reason. Then behind the scenes, without any consultation of the people living here or the people of Cape Town, suddenly the zoning changed. How did that happen? Now we must trust the city of Cape Town that they're going to do a proper process. This feels like a bit of a farce, and it's scary, and it's unjust. And I think that there's going to be obviously objections because something's wrong.
I have no doubt that there will be objections, okay? I'm not just looking around the room. But the reality is that the land is zoned utility.
When? When did that happen?
2015.
2015, after the adoption of the bylaw.
How did that happen?
How did it happen?
National government, through the Spatial Planning and Land Use Management Act, required all land in South Africa to be zoned. Okay? It delegated through the municipal planning bylaw the designation of that zoning to the local authorities. And in 2014, just after 2014, all land in the municipal area was designated an A zone. The owners of that land could question that zone. Okay? That was their right.
How much time and how were they informed?
Can you just respond and then you can...
There was a full process. I can't give you exactly that process. Okay, it was a long time ago, 10 years ago. I don't know what the timelines were attached to that, but they would have been statutorily determined by SPLUMA, the Spatial Planning and Land Use Management Act. The fact is that the site was zoned. It was legally zoned at that time.
Sorry, wasn't it zoned before?
No, because a lot of provincially owned land was not zoned.
Somebody said they made a mistake in the office.
But wasn't it a zoned institution or agricultural?
Prior to that, it may have been. Okay.
So it
a
was
lot of provincial land and a lot of state-owned land was not zoned prior to that, which is one of the reasons why SPLUMA required all land to be zoned. So I can tell you now, pre-2014, for example, none of the harbour in Cape Town was zoned. The only piece that was zoned was the waterfront, and that had a special zone called Development Zone, which was allocated to that because it fell under the SATS Act. Okay. So there were lots of inconsistencies that happened at the time. The reality is, irrespective of how it got there, today I am handed a piece of ground which is a utility zone on it. Okay? I need to change that in some or other form, even if it's just to accommodate the tenancy we have.
But before you change it, you need to find out what it was before and whether you're honouring that heritage.
But
otherwise your heritage
the heritage process is not attached to the zone. The zone is a statutory process. The heritage process is what we're doing right now. If there is a history in terms of land being passed to the government in whatever fashion, okay, that we have missed, you need to tell me.
Well, please look into it and find out.
Can I
comprehensive history?
Can I ask a question in that same question in a different way? It might assist you. If you, because remember you've got the one process, and then there's a process to sort out the zoning. In the process to sort out the zoning that is clearly, according to lots of people, it's a wrong zoning utility and the process in terms of how it got. Would you take into account when you are now in the process to try and rectify that, take into account the views of the current tenants who are here at Oude Molen?
To the extent that the current tenants at Oude Molen advise me of the incorrectness of it, it would obviously have to be taken into account. Okay. The fact is, if it is an incorrect zone on the land, the only person who can change that zone is the landowner. And there is a specific process in the DMS which allows for them to rectify the zoning. That can be followed.
Yeah.
Okay. The rectification of that zone might end up with an institutional zone on this site. The majority of the tenants on this site will already be excluded from that. Okay. So whether or not you're excluded under institutional or excluded under
what about development?
Sorry?
What about development? What about the special project? Is there such a thing? Zoning, why? In other words, you mentioned the harbour, which was a development zone.
That is no longer applicable, but that applied specifically to SATS land.
But is there such a thing as a special project zoning?
No.
Is it all mundane?
No, I mean there are zoning categories in the DMS and you would have to fall into one or other of the zoning categories. If we wanted to accommodate all the tenancies on this site tomorrow, it would probably be a mixed use zone. There is a category of zoning called mixed use. It would probably be that. And I'm not even sure that all of the tenancies that operate here also fall under that as an appropriate zone. So you might have to spot zone then specific places to accommodate the rights. But that's not part of the conversation I'm dealing with.
Okay. PJ? And sorry, just the guy with the green, you still want to ask a question? PJ? Well, sorry, just hang on, people. By then, I need to get an indication that we're going to stop all and then you can go through, continue with the process. And I think you're here till 7 is
7 o'clock.
Till 7, and it's 6:05 now. PJ?
You mentioned that this was rezoned in 2015 by city. Falkenberg and Jukai estates were both given to the state for perpetual purpose of use, for medicine and for disabled people of similar cases. Once the Jukai estate rezoned utilities at the same time as this was rezoned without consultation by the public.
No idea. Can't answer the question. I don't know what the zone of Takai is. I don't know what the zone of Takai is, so I can't answer that question. And I also can't answer the question is why this was given a utility zone. I wasn't part of that process. It happened, and I'm the recipient of it.
I'm just asking you
Fair.
to look into it
No,
and
you,
answer us.
you already answered that. Anybody else got a question? And then we must thank Nigel for agreeing to this process. Want to thank you guys for the way you conducted it. You weren't too bad, Nigel?
No.
Okay. So and make use of the opportunity. Nigel, there was a big request around the timeline. 10 days is a bit too tight. Mindful of the fact that you're telling people to go and read reports that are thousands of pages or hundreds of pages, so you got to give extra time. Mark, you want to have a last question, then I conclude, and he can make some concluding remarks.
I actually want to ask the heritage specialist,
yes,
who was involved in another process previously about the overall plan of the whole of the Two Rivers Urban Park. And in that process, there was a heritage report which we were asked to comment on, which we did. Okay? We submitted a whole lot of comments and concerns about the report in relation to the previous forms of investigation, previous reports. But our comments did not receive the appropriate attention, in my opinion. Okay? So maybe they did receive some attention in some form, but when that document was presented to Heritage Western Cape, as I recall, it was rejected, as I recall. So we are now coming up with a new process run by a different team, but the heritage professional was involved in the previous presentations of this. And, you know, we've read the previous documents, we've commented on those, and, you know, have we heard anything about it? Have we heard why Heritage Western Cape rejected it? You know, there's a gap. And I feel that in the short time that we have to assess the new document compared to the old document, and about all the comments that were put, you know, why weren't they integrated into it? So there's a whole lot of work that we would like help from the heritage specialists to account for what has gone on here, because it's clear to most of us that the heritage and the environment of this site as part of the overall Two Rivers Urban Park is being whitewashed. It's not being dealt with properly. Okay? It's not a personal attack. It's a concern about the process that is lost and it is dumped, and it's very frustrating to think we have to go through this again. But it's the same person and the same process, and we need better attention to actually draw out the points that we made, which are exactly the same as we would make now. So can we please note that we've all commented in the past, the Heritage Western Cape has commented in the past, and we're back at it. And we would like to know that all those comments are noted and that they've already been made, because they haven't been changed. And in fact, there are many other things that have been added through the process since then. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to respond to that?
don't think there's a response necessary.
Okay. So Nigel, you got a question? So that would be the last question, and then we're going to close. And then you guys can walk around and interact with the consultant as.
The comments has just been done, and it seems now that this is just a process where the boxes are being ticked. People is coming in with the already planned in, this is how we have interpreted. People is coming in here, and they just need all our signatures to show that there was a consultation process, and then the same type of strategy will be implemented, where all these comments and suggestions will just lie somewhere if they even have archive worldwide. According to the last part of the gentleman's presentation, it seems like he don't have any clue what happened previously, so it is very, very bad to send someone that is not informed about the previous processes and come with these type of verifications. So that brings me to a point where I feel that there's already a plan in place. This is just a window dressing type of approach. We are here to put down our signatures, and then that is the legitimate part of saying that there was consultation in this process. I just wanted to add that. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Good point. Thank you. Concluding comment you want to make before
we close?
Before we close, yeah.
Okay.
No, as we close.
As we close. Just in response to that, okay, we are professionals appointed by, in this case, the Western Cape government, to run a process that is guided by legislation. In fact, it's not guided by legislation, it's stipulated in terms of the legislation what has to happen. Okay? If there are concerns in relation to the content of the documentation, I need to know about that. If you have concerns about the process, both the past and the future, you need to stipulate that as well. Okay? I'm not going to be apologetic about what happened in the past. I'm not going to be apologetic about the process that I'm in at the moment, because I'm following a legislated process. I'm required to do that. To the extent that I can give you additional time, I will certainly put that to my client. Sorry?
That's what they said under apartheid too. They were just following the legislative process. It doesn't make it any better.
I'm going to just
Okay, so thanks, people. Nigel, I think the one point I think, Nigel, that is quite clear is that people say that you need to take cognizance. We understand they're going to make comments, but you need to take cognizance of what happened before. And the previous consultants also indicated they operated in terms of a legislated thing and so on. So that is a fundamental point that is coming through here. Is you can't just say that you're starting from now. It started 2001 or 2005 or something like that already. Thank you, people. Thanks for the way we handled it. And don't forget to make your voices heard. Salute.